All right, here we go again. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another installment of the Jawbreaker MMA podcast. My name is Adam. That guy's Roman. Special edition associated with the Sports Mark Analyst, as always. My bad. Special quarantine edition of the podcast. We're doing things a little different. It's been a long time since we've done a show, and obviously there isn't too much going on right now in the sports world. Although we do have some light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, with UFC 249 still being in play as of now. So we'll see how that goes, if that's still going to exist, even if it is on another planet. Roman brought up the idea. We switched things up a bit. In between weeks while this is going on, decided to take part in MMA Mania's kind of MMA March Madness bracket. So they put together a bracket of what they would say are the best fights in MMA history, put them against each other, eventually, March Madness style, and different all quadrants, and at the end we pick our winners from each quadrant, face them off against each other, and see which we think are the best fights. So for this week, in the weeks coming, we're just going to do one part per week, one quadrant. So if anybody would want to follow along, it's MMAmania.com. They have the brackets there. So we are going to start with the top left portion of the bracket. So in our first matchup, we have Robbie Lawler against Rory McDonald 2, against Dennis Bermudez and Matt Grace. It's Matt, right? I'm pretty sure it's Matt Grace. Matt Grace. Yeah. All right. So, Roman, you have the floor.
Okay. So, Robbie Lawler against Rory McDonald, Part 2, UFC 189, co-main event, July 11th, 2015. That was the co-main event, and the headliner, I believe it was, I'm going to say, McGregor and Chad Mendes for the interim title. That was a good card.
Yeah.
Lawler and McDonald did fight at UFC 167. It was a split decision by Robbie Lawler. And Rory McDonald was coming into this fight on a 3-fight win streak. Robbie Lawler recently defeated Johnny Hendricks for the welterweight title in a rematch. And this fight was really good. Some judges actually had Rory McDonald ahead up until the 5th round, where Lawler just cracked McDonald right in the nose. His nose was pretty much broken already, and he just cracked him a minute in, and that was the end of it. It was an amazing fight. Bloody. McDonald had Lawler hurt, I believe, in the 2nd round, and in the 3rd round, he had him rocked, if I'm correct. I think it was more of the 2nd round. But yeah, I think McDonald was on his way to becoming the champion if it wasn't for the stoppage. And then, you want me to recap the next fight?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So Dennis Bermudez and Matt Grice was UFC 157, the prelim fight. This was February 23rd, 2013. You have Matt Grice coming off a win over Leonard Garcia, and this was actually his last fight after he fought Dennis Bermudez. He was involved in a car accident with serious injuries, so it was his last fight and I mean, it was a memorable fight to say the least. And Dennis Bermudez, this was his third fight in the UFC. He was on a 2-fight win streak. I don't know. I kind of thought Grice won that fight when I rewatched it. I think the second round was where he did most of the controlling, and Bermudez took control towards the end of the fight. Third round was clearly Bermudez. He literally let it all go, and Matt Grice.
That was crazy at the
first
end.
round. Yeah, he dropped him. But what's crazy is the next fight after this fight, when Bermudez won, he went on to defeat Max Holloway in his next fight by a split decision, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's right. So who'd you have winning between these two fights?
Okay, so between those two, I went with Lawler and McDonald too. I mean, Robbie Lawler was on a different level. I mean, guy showed so much heart, didn't quit. Even McDonald at one point, he was fighting with a broken nose throughout the fight. I think it was one of the best welterweight title fights at that time. So I picked McDonald and Lawler to move on in this bracket.
Yeah. So yeah, as soon as I saw that being the first fight, I thought, yeah, like, all right, this is a no-brainer. Lawler McDonald too is like, it's one of the best fights. It's one of the best fights ever. Definitely, especially when talking about the welterweights. With that being said, though, I didn't remember much of Bermudez and Grice, so I did re-watch it, and to give it credit, I forgot how good of a fight that was as well. That was pretty crazy, especially towards the end. But yeah, I agree. Lawler McDonald still, I still think it's kind of a no-brainer. Just back and forth, as gory as it sounds, the blood. It was just the heart these guys had. Really showed they didn't want to stop, and like you mentioned, once Rory got hit in the nose at the end of the fight, I mean, you could just tell he was just had enough. He took all he could, and then after he got that, it's like, man, like he just given up. He couldn't go any longer. And man, that the looks, well, both their faces will always be memorable. The way that both their faces look. Robbie with that cut on his lip, it looked like his lip was like sliced right open, like deep. And yeah, Rory's nose and his eyes and everything. I mean, so he just looked like a totally different person. And that look, that stare they gave each other after the fourth round.
Yeah,
was just like, man, like these guys, like they're willing to die in there. So yeah, I thought that one was easy enough. So I agree. I give it to Lawler McDonald too. Moving on to the next round. All right, next fight. We've got the Korean Zombie, Chan Sung Jung. It's Dustin Poirier. That fight going up against classic Vanderlei Silva, Rampage Jackson 2. Pride 28?
Yeah, Pride 28.
28, right? All right. What do you think of this matchup?
So, Korean Zombie against Dustin Poirier, main event, UFC on Fuel TV back in the Fox days, March 15, 2012. This was basically a title implication fight to see who's going to fight Jose Aldo next. Korean Zombie was on a 2-fight win streak. Dustin Poirier was on a 5-fight win streak, 4-0 in the UFC at that time. He did submit Max Holloway in his prior fight. That's pretty big when you look at it. And it was a classic fight. It was back and forth a bit with different transitions, and Korean Zombie went on his way in the 4th round to submit Dustin Poirier, and he would go ahead and challenge Jose Aldo in the next fight. Yeah, I mean, when you look at that fight, you look at how much weight Poirier had to cut down, and he was a lot bigger than Korean Zombie. Like that
Yeah,
guy's pretty much a natural 155er.
good guy. Yeah.
It's just amazes me like watching the fight from back then. Wow, this guy cut so much weight just to make.
Even 55 is
Mhm.
pretty big. Yeah.
Right, yeah. And then you have Vanderlei Silva and Rampage Jackson, Pride 28, October 31st, 2004. I mean, to understand this fight, you have to go back and watch the first fight of Vanderlei and Jackson. It basically leads up. It's like a story that leads up to how they hate each other and the feud, the rivalry that they had. And like Vanderlei Silva at the Pride days was insane. He was known for his Muay Thai clinch, his kicks. He was so aggressive. But anyways, Vanderlei was coming in the fight with a 6-fight win streak. Quinn Jackson was on the 2-fight win streak. They did fight once in. I'm sorry. They fought in 2003, the first time, and yeah, Quinn Jackson pretty much dominated. I'm sorry, Vanderlei pretty much dominated Quinn Jackson for the most part of the fight. Rampage had his moments, but the Muay Thai was just too much to handle, and Silva just put him away. And he was pretty much the king of the middleweight division and Pride at that time. So I picked in this fight, the winner for this fight, I went with Silva and Jackson just because the build up and everything that was going on, and just like the Pride days, it was just really cool to watch. Pretty much like no rules there, anything goes.
Yeah, no, I agree. When I was rewatching it, I was like, man, this stuff was like, it was so, I mean, obviously different, but just the excitement was there too. The crowds in Japan at the Saitama Super Arena, that was like, I mean, they were huge. First of all, the place was like gigantic, and yeah, it was a whole spectacle. Like the whole atmosphere, like these guys were like gods in a ring, and everyone worshipped like what they were doing. It was like it was a whole. It was show business. It was a big show and entertainment, along with being a fight. Funny enough, referring back to Korean Zombie and Poirier, today's the anniversary actually of the Twister that Poirier had. Yeah, I just saw that pop up earlier. So, but yeah, that was I mean, that was an awesome fight. That was one of those fights that I had forgotten about and had forgotten how it went down. So yeah, that was nuts. I mean, they were back and forth. Eventually, Korean Zombie catches him in that Darce choke when I think Poirier was going for a takedown and he caught him.
Yeah, he was going for the takedown and he was able to counter.
Yeah, he caught him in that Darce choke, which was nuts. Yeah, then Rampage and Silva. How did the first fight end?
The first fight. The second fight. Remind me how it ended again, because
Well, the second, I think they both ended the same way, didn't they?
Did Rampage land through the ropes? Or was it the first one?
Second fight? No, I think that was the first.
So the first one, I believe Rampage landed. He was brutally beaten. The second fight, when did it ended in the first or second round? I'm sorry.
No, I don't think it was the first round.
Second round. So the first fight, okay, the first fight ended in the first round. Okay, it ended in the first round, and pretty much the same result. Second fight, it went 2 rounds.
And the same thing happened, right? I mean, well, here's what
the same thing, because I remember at that time because Rampage beat Chuck Liddell at that time, and the whole matchup, everyone thought we'll finally see Chuck Liddell and Vanderlei finally fight in Pride. But yeah, it was pretty much the same thing with the knees and
yeah. And I thought, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong here, but I thought when I was watching the fight over that like Rampage, he had some good control of the fight. I mean, he was in top position a lot.
Yeah.
There were some clinches that he was involved with, but for the most part, he had top position on Vanderlei, and he was winning. And then Vanderlei just came and got in the clinch, and those knees just put him away. Yeah, in the second round, put Rampage away, which is crazy because I mean, you can consider that was like a comeback. You know,
Yeah.
I thought so. So,
And for the people that only saw Vanderlei fight in the UFC with those losses that he had, if you really want to see Vanderlei at his best, you got to watch him in the 5 days because that's when he was completely dominant there, like unstoppable.
Yeah, unfortunately, once it seems like once he was in the UFC, he I don't want to say he was past his prime necessarily, but he just he had the bulk of his success and pride, and yeah, it was just a totally different animal then. So but yeah, I'm gonna agree with you there though. Stillman Jackson too, just classic, just the whole nostalgic feel of it, and the comeback by Vanderlei with those knees. That was yeah, that was something else. So I agree. I have that fight moving on to next. All right, next matchup. We have Fedor against Crow Cop. Was that Pride 25?
They called it Final Conflict. Yeah, Pride Final Conflict 2005.
All right, so yeah, Fedor Crow Cop going up against Jim Miller and Joe Lozon 1.
Yes. So yeah, Fedor and Crow Cop was the co-main event, and that was August 28, 2005. That was the biggest heavyweight fight at that time to make. People wanted to see who was the better striker, who was able to knock the other guy out. You had Mirko Crow Cop. They said, I love this one. They said right kick hospital, left kick cemetery against Fedor. They called him the Russian experiment at that time. I mean, Fedor was coming into the fight with 12 wins, one no contest. He was going into this fight to avenge the loss of his brother when Crow Cop knocked him out by that leg kick. Crow Cop was on a 7-fight win streak, so it made all the perfect sense for this. Crow Cop landed some good punches at first and some nasty kicks, but Fedor was able to strike with Crow Cop, and then of course he took him down and just controlled him on the ground. He dominated him, landed nasty punches, was able to cut up Crow Cop. It was a one-sided fight pretty much all around, and Fedor was able to defend his heavyweight title. And then you have Jim Miller and Joe Lozon, UFC 155 co-main. That was December 29, 2012, I believe. Dos Santos and Cain Velasquez was the main event at that time. It was the rematch. Yeah. So you have Jim Miller. He was coming off of a submission loss to Nate Diaz, and he replaced Gray Maynard on week's notice.
Was that the fight we were at?
We went to that fight, yes. We went to that fight of we saw Miller get submitted by Nate Diaz.
Yeah.
And then you have Then you have Joe Lozon coming off of a win over Jamie Vonner, and this fight was crazy. In the first round, Jim Miller was able to open up Lozon, and he was bleeding. It was like basically watching it was a bloodbath, pretty much.
Cut was insane.
Full of blood all over the
the
mat.
Craziest cuts ever, yeah.
And not for nothing, Lozon had some scary moments there with Miller. He was able to. He almost submitted him a few times in that fight. Some nasty leg locks he had on him, even armbar, I believe, at one point. But Miller was able to pull this off. Really, really good fight. And between these two, I picked Fedor and Crow Cop just because this was the biggest heavyweight fight at that time. The build up to it, it was basically a pick'em fight. It was 50-50 could have went both ways.
Yeah, I agree. This was of the fights that we've talked about so far. This was the first one that was kind of tough. Yeah, Fedor. No, I didn't really watch. I honestly don't think I really watched a full Fedor fight from being in pride. So when I watched this one, I was like, man, like I mean, he was big. He just looked like he was something else back then. He
Yeah,
was
he
big.
weighed
He was
like
like a big,
230. For that time, that was pretty big.
but he was solid too.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was like a big Russian bear. That's what he looked like, a big Russian bear. And yeah, you had Crow Cop he fought in K1, right? Wasn't
K1,
he?
yeah, and he was tall. I mean, that's what made
Yeah,
him pretty.
yeah. For a while, and yeah, also a big guy in his own right. But yeah, I thought, like you said, Crow Cop, he had some good kicks, strikes at some point, but for the most part, Fedor pretty much took over, kind of mauled him on the ground, ground and pound. Got the unanimous decision. Um, Honestly, he made it look fairly easy, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the fight itself, I think the build up and the anticipation for it was almost bigger than with the actual fight. But still, overall good. It was impressive. Um, then Jim Miller and Joe Lozon. Yeah, like you were saying, that cut was just the story of the whole fight. It was like crazy. I mean, that was like a gusher, like a waterfall of blood just coming out, painting the mat. Um, like it's one of those fights, and I like uh, I like the one part where um, I think Lozon's in Miller's guard and they're up against the fence, and the referee
Mm-hmm.
stops the fight at one point just to cut the tape that's off one of their wrists. I forget which one. So he stops the fight, has him stay in that position until someone comes over and cuts the tape that's hanging off, excess tape. And while that's happening, they're talking to each other, saying like, "Oh, good fight, man!" Like, and everyone's just bleeding, beating the crap out of each other, and it's like, yeah, these guys are just going to war, and like, hey, like, good job, hey, you too, yeah. I mean, that's awesome. That's such a pure form of like, you wish you get a fight. Guys who love what they're doing and respect the hell out of each other while they're doing it. So yeah, it was tough, but you know what? I actually chose Miller Lozon because, and mostly because I just think Fedor dominated so well that it wasn't the best fight as far as it being competitive. Um, I thought, yeah, I just thought it was Fedor just proving again why he's so dominant. Whereas I don't know, I guess Lozon and Miller, I thought it was more of a back and forth war, a lot of transition submission attempts, striking. It had a little of everything. So yeah, I went with Miller Lozon. Moving on. All right, next up, a couple really good ones. I think this
Mm-hmm.
is actually Jose Aldo, Chad Mendez 2, going up against Dominic Cruz and TJ Dillashaw.
Yep. Yeah, Jose Aldo, Chad Mendes 2, UFC 179, October 25th, 2014 rematch. Also back in Brazil. They fought the first time in Brazil in 2012, UFC 142 in January. So Aldo he was on the,
Behind you.
yes, the poster behind me. Uh, Jose Aldo was coming in with a 7-fight win streak in the UFC and was going in to defend the title for the 7th time as well. Um, you have Chad Mendes. When he first fought for the belt, he was 2-0 in the UFC, so he was a young guy. And then after that, he built up a 5-fight win streak to get the rematch. And this fight was pretty much a war. Um, these guys were exchanging a lot of punches. I mean, mind you, in the first fight, Mendes got knocked out in the 1 second left in the first round by a knee kick while he was trying to go for a takedown, and Aldo spun out and just kneed him. Second fight, he took a lot of punches by Aldo, and
Yeah.
in the first round, when I remember when it ended, Aldo hit Mendes after the bell twice, so he kind of rocked him, but the fight was really close. And when I rewatched it, I could see why they gave the fight to Aldo. The first round was I gave it to Aldo. I guess the second round, third round was for Mendes. I want to say I believe it was Mendes, and then the fourth round, I think also for Mendes, and the one of those, and then fifth round, I think yeah, it was close, really close fight. I mean, I think it kind of played off that it was in Brazil, so Aldo had a little bit more of an advantage in that fight.
Yeah.
And then you had TJ Dillashaw against Dominic Cruz, UFC Fight Night, 81, January 17th, 2016. My dad's birthday. I remember that one. Uh, yeah, I mean, you had Dominic. He never lost the belt. He had to relinquish the title due to an injury, and his prior fight was back in September 2014 when he beat Takeya Mizugaki to become the number one contender. And before that, he fought in October 2011, defeating Demetrius Johnson. So the Cruz was basically on a layoff. And then TJ Dillashaw, he was on a 4-fight win streak. He defeated one of the best strikers at that time, Renan Barão. He beat him twice. And then
Barão was a monster.
yes, and he was looking to defend the title for the third time against Cruz. This fight was really good, and when I rewatched this fight, I see why Cruz won. There was a lot of misses by Dillashaw. Even though Dillashaw had more takedowns, Cruz was able to counter Dillashaw, land more efficient strikes, and he was able to capture the title. And what sucks is Cruz hasn't fought since 2016 as of now, so he's hopefully he comes back. I mean, this poor guy has been battling injuries so much. I think if it wasn't for the
I didn't
injuries,
realize it's been that long. Has it
yeah,
been that long?
yeah, his last fight was Cody Garbrandt.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was
Yeah, it's
16.
crazy. So the fight that I picked out of those was Cruz and Dillashaw because Cruz came into this fight with injuries too. He said at the end of the fight he was still battling injuries and just the he just jumped in for a title fight and defeated one of the best at that time, one of the best strikers, TJ Dillashaw, who had such power. He was able to basically outclass him in 5 rounds.
Yeah. This was, I think, this matchup was the hardest for me to choose. Because they're both, you know what? I think they're both close, very close fights, but just different though. Like you had Cruz and Dillashaw, were I think more technical. Not as much. I mean, no, I'm sorry. They had more. There was more movement. A lot of footwork was involved. Whereas Mendes and Aldo, they were. They were kind of brawling. They were both getting hit with some shots. And you got to give Aldo credit too, because Mendes was hitting them hard. And it was just back and forth like the whole time. But yeah, I do think Aldo got got the the home crowd advantage in that one. Cruz Dillashaw. Cruz Dillashaw was, it was impressive. It was like you said, Cruz, after he had come back, he looked really good. Dillashaw was missing a bunch of strikes, still very close, but yeah, I do think they definitely got that right after noticing how many misses Dillashaw had. As I'm talking about, I'm still kind of contemplating my decision, and you know what? I initially for this, I had chosen Aldo Mendez, but the more I think about it, me personally, and maybe I'm being biased or something, but I think I did enjoy Cruz Dillashaw more. So I guess I should make my judgments off what I think was better, even if other people don't, because I think some people could watch Aldo Mendez and just see these big shots that they were landing and think like, oh man, like that's great. They're taking these shots and they're really brawling. And think that's more entertaining. And there could probably, I bet there are people who watch Cruz Dillashaw and think, it's kind of boring. I mean, they're moving around a lot. They're not really,
It's more of a technicality.
yeah,
The fight was all who had the better technique.
right,
That's what makes a fight good.
right. And that's what I thought was more impressive. It's just they're more calculated for that fight. Whereas, some people would just want to see the haymakers and the big shots and see people on the verge of getting knocked out. But yeah, I'm gonna go Cruz Dillashaw. It was honestly, it was one of my favorite fights for multiple reasons. Yeah, I'll go. I'm going Cruz Dillashaw.
Okay.
All right. So next pair of fights up to Robbie Lawler again going against Carlos Condit, and Joe Lozon popping up going up against Jamie Varner. The fight that you mentioned a little earlier.
Yes. So Robbie Lawler and Carlos Condit, UFC 195, January 2nd, 2016, day after New Year's. Robbie Lawler was going in to make his second title defense after defeating Rory McDonald. Carlos Condit was coming off a TKO win over Thiago Alves after he was out for a year from a torn ACL when he fought Tyron Woodley when his knee just basically tore and was out for a year. This was a classic fight. Like two of the best strikers at that time just brawling it out. Condit had Lawler hurt. Robbie just turned up the heat in the fifth round where he really needed it. He was able to just get Condit frozen up and just hurt in the fifth round. They left it all in the octagon. Yeah, even at the end of the fight, you saw them together, just leaning against the cage. That I think that was the classic picture that they have.
Yeah, that was awesome.
They were literally gassed out. They had no energy. They left it all out there, and it was very close. But I could see how Robbie Lawler won the fight. Then you have Joe Lozon and Jamie Varner, UFC Fox 4. That was the second fight on the main card. This was in August 4th, 2012. Joe Lozon was coming off of a knockout loss to Anthony Pettis. And Jamie Varner took the fight on short notice. He was on a 3-fight win streak. He had an impressive TKO victory over Edson Barboza in his UFC return fight. That's when we went to that fight. That was the only good fight of the night. Everything else was boring.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I didn't realize that.
That was the first fight of the main card. That was the only highlight.
That card was horrible outside of it. Yeah, that was all. Yeah, you're right. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, and Jamie Varner was winning the first two rounds, even though he was gassing out a little bit towards the end of the first and in the second. He was winning the fight. He was on pace of winning the fight and making him a 4-5 win streak. But Lazon was able to get him in a triangle and submit him. So between those two fights, the fight I picked was Robbie Lawler and Carlos Condit because that was a classic fight between them two and a good way to start off the year.
I agree. Um, I think this was like it's like Robbie Lawler can't be any good fight he's in just turned into a great fight automatically. Um, yeah, Lawler kind of that was one of those fights too. Like I remember it being good, but when I rewatched it, I think yesterday, I was like, oh my god, this fight's amazing. One of the best fights ever. I mean, and yeah, like you said at the end when they're both leaning on the cage, you could tell they just gave it everything. They were like trying to like put each other out, and the combinations too. The combinations they were both throwing, especially Condit. Um, that's all. That's all they were throwing. Combos, back and forth combos. Like the things were ending with a kick. It was great. They were just throwing everything at each other. And then Lozon Varner. Unfortunately, I mean, it was a good fight. Um, a little back and forth, but I just feel like it just couldn't compete with Lawler Condit. It was too much of a classic. Probably one of my favorite fights ever, really. So yeah, I agree. I went with Lawler Condit also. All right, next couple coming up. We have Conor McGregor against Nate Diaz, one very first fight, going up against Benson Henderson and Donald Cerrone, one, which is a WEC fight.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz, UFC 196, March 5th, 2016, was the main event. And funny enough, the co-main event was Miesha Tate and Holly Holm. So you had a non-title fight main event. The reason why, because Rafael Dos Anjos was supposed to defend his lightweight title against Conor, but he got injured. So Nate Diaz took the fight on 2 weeks' notice, if not maybe a little bit less than 2 weeks' notice. McGregor was coming off a crazy 13-second knockout win over Jose Aldo, featherweight division, and he literally just wanted to jump up to 155 and claim another belt. And what's great was that this fight took place in the welterweight division, so it was two weight classes that he jumped up to. And then, Conor McGregor was on a 15-fight win streak, 7-0 in the UFC, and Nate Diaz was coming off a really impressive win over Michael Johnson in that past December. And what was amazing was even though McGregor was going to fight Rafael Dos Anjos, Nate Diaz made that famous speech calling out Conor McGregor, saying he's coming after him because he's taking everything he worked for, and he wanted to prove that he's the baddest guy in the business, not Conor. And yeah, the first round, Conor was completely controlling the fight for at least 4 minutes, and then when there was like a minute left, Diaz was able to tag Conor with a few punches. And then in the second round, Conor was slightly controlling the fight, but he gassed out. I think he was more focused on trying to knock out Diaz more than trying to outpoint him with the jabs. And then as soon as Diaz put pressure on Conor, Conor went for a desperate takedown, and Diaz was able to lock in the rear naked choke and just tap him out. And yeah, that was a classic. That just basically made Nate Diaz who Nate Diaz is today.
Yeah.
And now you go into the other fight, Donald Cerrone and Benson Henderson, WEC 43, October 10th, 2009. Yeah, WEC was one of the best organizations for the lighter guys. To this day, I still think it's one. They have so many classic fights where you could go back and watch how these guys were and how they made it to the UFC. So I strongly recommend for people to check out WEC fights. But this was for the interim lightweight title because Jamie Vonner was injured. Cerrone was coming off a submission win over James Krause at that time after losing to Vonner for the lightweight title. And this was Benson Henderson's third fight in the WEC. Both fights prior in WEC, he had finishes over top stars of Anthony and Kajawani. He had a submission, and Shane Roller, he had a TKO. Those two guys at that time were the top of the crop in WEC. So that's why Benson was able to get this title shot. And Benson Henderson, he had some crazy takedowns. And Cerrone was countering with the submissions. At one point, he had Benson's arms like bending, like it was crazy. And the fight was really close, but Benson Henderson was able to pull that off going into a win. You could make a case that Cerrone won that fight, but I think it was more of Benson Henderson's ground control in the early rounds that pulled it off. So between those two fights, I picked Conor and Nate Diaz as my winner.
Okay. Yeah, that it's funny, like you were saying that Conor Diaz, that was the main event over Holly Holm and Miesha Tate. It was up until recently probably the best women's fight ever. Probably up until Joanna and Zhang Wei Li fought just recently. So yeah, that that was just something. Like you said, it was Nate Diaz's like coming out party to a lot of people who just weren't too familiar with him. A lot of new fans brought into the sport by Conor, who just didn't know exactly who Nate Diaz was, and I don't think they knew just exactly how dangerous he was. Obviously, the whole little build up to it was great. They had like a nice little striking match, and then Diaz just did what Diaz does, and he showed his boxing. And I can't believe, even like just recently watching again, that Conor would go for that takedown.
Yeah.
It was just a desperate move, but very, not very smart at all. And then the unthinkable happened. The great Conor McGregor got choked out, and it just it just lit everything on fire. Basically, it took away like the mystique a little bit for Conor. It's like, oh man, this guy can lose. He talks so much. He was on such a streak, and he lost like almost like nothing really. I mean, Diaz pretty much had his way. Once the beginning of the fight ended, he was pretty much just going at him. Conor gassed fairly quickly, and he took advantage of that really well. And Benson Henderson, Cerrone, like that was that was actually exciting. That's again another one that I hadn't watched in a while. But yeah, those submission attempts were crazy. It was basically Henderson. I do think they got it right. I think for the most part, he was being the aggressor. Cerrone was kind of being defensive, especially on the ground, trying to like catch him with a submission. But the technical part, back and forth, the transitions also that they had, it was just awesome to see it. Like it's a nice, pure, what a mixed martial arts match should be really. A mix of just about everything. I may have, pretty unpopular opinion, but I'm giving this to Henderson Cerrone.
Okay.
And mostly just because of the competitiveness. mean, McGregor Diaz one was obviously the bigger fight. Um, Obviously, it had a lot more eyes on it. Um, it'll definitely be remembered more by people in general. But as far as the way the fight went at the moment, yeah, I gave a slight edge to Henderson Cerrone just because of the competitiveness in the fight. All right. All right, next up, we have here's you know what, I have to admit, this fight I only saw the first 30 seconds of it. In the past, I've never seen it
That was pretty much the whole fight.
That was pretty much, yeah. Don Fry against is it Yoshihiro Takayama, right?
Yeah.
Yoshihiro Takayama and Pride against and that fight going up against Chris Lieben and Akiyama in the UFC.
So yeah, Don Fry versus Yoshihiro Takayama, Pride 21, June 23rd, 2002. That was the main event, surprisingly. And Don Fry was on a 8-fight.
I'm sorry, what was the other fight on there? Was it Rampage on there?
Good question.
I
think Fedor was even on that card.
Maybe it was Fedor. Yeah, I remember there was a big name on there, so I remember. Yeah. I read that too. This
ended up being a main event.
Yeah, I guess because
this was more of a spectacle fight because Takayama originally he's a professional Japanese wrestler, and he was coming in to the fight with an 0-3 professional record in MMA. The only reason why this was the main event that I could actually say, because he was huge. This guy was built like big guy,
especially for a Japanese guy.
Yeah, and Don Fry was just like, I mean, he was built, but not as built as
Don Fry was pretty jacked though. I didn't realize how
basically this fight was.
I mean, he was probably on some stuff.
Yeah.
By the way he looked.
I'm not going to accuse anyone in the Pride organization on that, but
I think it's safe to say Pride was like, you want some special stud, take whatever you want.
I mean, some said the refs were fixing the fights, but I'm not going to go there because if that would suck if you come to find out that all these fights were fixed. But yeah, Don Fry basically looked like Captain America, like the American hero. He came in there. As soon as the bell rang, they came in there, clenched, and started clobbing each other with punches. And Don Fry just got the best of him. He just 6 minutes into the fight was able to pretty much TKO him and win the fight. And Chris Lieben versus Yoshihiro Akiyama, UFC 116, the co-main event, July 3rd, 2010. Brock Lesnar was actually the main event against Shane Carwin in that fight, I remember. So originally, Vanderlei Silva was supposed to fight Akiyama. That was the fight originally, but Chris Lieben took the fight on short notice. He was on a 2-fight win streak. He took this fight 2 weeks prior, after beating Aaron Simpson. So he fought 2 weeks before that. And this was Akiyama's second fight in the UFC. He last fought UFC 100. He won by a split decision to Alan Belcher. So in this fight, Akiyama was beating Lieben. He was hitting him with more of the harder hits. He was able to take him down, but the gas tank pretty much failed Akiyama, and Lieben was able to submit him towards the end of the third round. Was it triangle?
It was a triangle, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This basically made Chris Lieben who he is. He basically showed why his nickname was the Crippler. So between those two fights, I took Chris Lieben and Akiyama just because of the heart. He took the fight at 2 weeks' notice after fighting 2 weeks prior. So that's who I pick.
All right. Yeah. Fry and Takayama was those first that first fury of them just holding each other's heads and going punch for punch. I mean, it was pretty amusing, to be
I
honest.
don't even know how that fight was even sanctioned because of the
Yeah.
experience.
Like you said, it was pride. I don't think they really cared so much about what if it should have been done or not. They just did it for the spectacle. I mean, that was part of who they were. But yeah, they just kept them going back and forth. Just going punch for punch was just it was pretty ridiculous,
Mm-hmm.
to be honest. And yeah, it's no wonder that soon after that, Fry was able to get the win. Yeah, Lieben Nakayama. That was yeah, like you were saying. I mean, it was awesome going into that third, right? He finished in the third. Um, yeah, he was getting beat on. Lieben was. Um, I think right before the third round, the second round started, they had like little face off. Lieben was like so
Mm-hmm.
fired up.
Yeah.
It was awesome to watch. They both were ready to just go at it. They were both really fired up. And then yeah, Lieben caught him, like you said, after Akiyama gassed out, and caught him in a triangle choke, which was just great. I agree. I think this was actually pretty easy for me. Seeing Lieben make a little comeback and take that fight was I had that going on next over Fry and Takayama. All right, now the last matchup we're doing. Well, in the first round, we have Diaz and McGregor 2. I thought it was pretty interesting that they put both
Yeah.
Diaz and McGregor fights on one side.
I thought they would put it on a different bracket.
Yeah, Diaz and McGregor 2 going up against Fedor Emelianenko and Nogueira Big Nog 1.
So Diaz versus Connor, UFC 202, August 20th, 2016. Rematch from the first one. Connor wanted to prove that he could fix this mistake. They fought at welterweight again. And again, this was a really good fight of them just going back and forth. Connor won the first round, was able to knock down Diaz, was landing nasty leg kicks to him, was able to open him up. Then you had Diaz making the comeback towards the end of the second round. In the third round, that you could make an argument it was almost 10-8 almost. He was, I think he was moments of finishing McGregor. I think if there was some more time, he would have finished him. And I think Conor learned a lot from that first fight, not to go for desperate takedowns when you're in trouble and just try to protect yourself. Yeah, and then the fourth round, Conor was able to come back and win that round from Diaz. And fifth round, it was close. I think I gave the edge to Diaz in the fifth round. So it was mainly the second round where you have to like pick,
Yeah.
because Diaz was able to steal it towards the end, but Connor was mostly controlling it. So,
Began it really well. Yeah.
yeah, so I could see why they gave that decision to Connor over
Mm-hmm.
Diaz, and that's why I think there should be a trilogy.
Gone either way. Yeah.
Down.
I really wish, like, after, sorry, just to cut you off real quick, like, I think, especially after I just I rewatched it today, and I'm thinking, like, man, like, how do they not have a third fight yet?
Yeah,
Like, after that fight, that was just so close. It could have really gone either way.
and they even said they wanted to fight for the third time and said at 155 the third fight would happen. I don't know. I think what mainly happened was
Connor
Diaz.
needs to get another belt. I mean, that's.
Well, Connor fought Eddie Alvarez right after, and won the belt from
That
there.
changed. I think that changed everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Diaz was not available to take the fight on that short-term notice, because Connor came back in November and fought Eddie Alvarez. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's pretty short-term,
Yeah.
2 months at least. Yeah, 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. Now you have, and then we had Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira Big Nog against Fedor Pride 25, March 16, 2003. So this at that time, this was really a true test. At that time, it was the biggest heavyweight fight because Crow Cop was not in the picture just yet. So Nogueira was on a 13 fight win streak. He was coming off a mission win over Dan Anderson. He avenged his only loss at that time. And Fedor, he was on an 8 fight win streak. And after after his first loss, he went on an 8 fight win streak. Sorry, and this was his third fight in Pride. So that's where he earned the name, the Russian Experiment. They wanted to see what he was all about. You had Nogueira, who had nasty submissions. You know, he was not afraid to go to the ground. You know, he actually preferred to be on the ground and just submit you from his back. And Fedor, who was a great striker with great sambo wrestling, going into the fight, he rocked Nogueira, and then he just took Nogueira down at will and just really controlled and beat him off Nogueira's guard. I mean, Nogueira had some moments with the submissions, but Fedor was just pure experience. Like, was able to just control Nogueira, and I think this is where a lot of these future fighters learned about the game of, you know, wrestling and like
Khabib, I thought of Khabib when I was watching.
Yeah. GSP even too. He's
And,
smart.
Yeah.
Go for the takedown and just fight. Just do ground and pounds. So yeah, Fedor I think set out the blueprint in this fight. But the winner of this between those two, I picked Diaz and McGregor too, just because of the build up. You know, everyone, not even if you were not a MMA fan, people wanted to see this rematch, like to see can McGregor really win and, you know, and back up everything what he said throughout his career, you know, saying he's the best. So this literally drew a lot of attention. And we were in Vegas at that time, actually.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of people.
I almost forgot about that, funny enough. It was kind of a blur.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Fedor Nogueira, yeah, that again, kind of like the fight we talked about between Fedor and Crow Cop. I mean, obviously it wasn't the same fight, but Fedor again just, you know, eventually showed some dominance, and he just, once he got on top of him, even being, like you said, in kind of what most people would be a dangerous position, being in the guard of Big Nog, Fedor just he took control, like again, like just mauling him like a big Russian bear. Like that's exactly what I thought. It was just a big, solid. He put all his weight on him, and just he took total control. Like I was saying, it definitely reminded me. It could be very much like GSP as well. Yeah, they have. Like, it's amazing once you get that top position, and you if you're able to stay there and stay on top, and you use your hip strength and just your weight to impose that on your opponent, it really can make the biggest difference. So that was crazy impressive by Fedor. Now the Diaz Connor fight, the second one, yeah, the buildup was huge. I mean, after that first fight, after Diaz, you know, shocked everybody and got the submission over Connor, the buildup was just amazing. It's like, oh man, can it happen again? Can Connor come back? Because if Connor, man, there's a lot of pressure on Connor. If Connor couldn't edge out a win or just get a win, then this whole, I mean, I think he would have lost out on even more. Him losing the first time, you know, at least he had more of a reason. It was short notice. It's a different weight class. You know, you can argue both guys weren't fully prepared for each other. But this fight, you definitely saw Connor being a lot more intelligent, conserving his energy. You know, moving away, getting away when he needed to, taking breaks when he needed to with his strikes. You know, not going always for the home run punch, being very calculated with his punching. And one thing too that I noticed, it looks like Diaz was cut in both fights
Yes.
in the same spot. Also, like the same spot where he got cut for the Masvidal fight. It's right above his right eye. I guess he's got some crazy. I mean, he also got caught in the
Scar
bottom.
tissue.
Yeah, but he's got some crazy scar tissue, maybe specifically in that spot. Because and I think it was the second fight, right? It was really bleeding.
Yeah.
It was really coming down
Yeah.
because it was getting in his eye. You see him like wiping off the blood. Um, so so anyway, but Connor was he's being very he was calculating his punches, making sure that they count. Didn't throw just for the hell of it. And it was a really close fight. It really could have gone either way, in my opinion.
And he basically, with that win for Conor, he was basically able to get that title fight because I think they wanted to do Eddie Alvarez and Habib at one point, and they actually then gave it to Conor.
Yeah.
So if Conor didn't win the fight, who knows what would have happened.
He had all the hype behind him, but he avenged the loss. The UFC knew what they were doing. They have to ride this train while it was hot.
Basically set up Mayweather and Conor after that fight with Eddie Alvarez.
Yeah, the UFC knew they struck gold with Conor, so they wanted to make it count for as long as possible. So, I think it was very beneficial for them that Conor won the fight. Although, I mean, let's say if Nate would have won, maybe they would have done the same with Nate Diaz. Maybe he would have gone that route, But yeah. So I agree. Just with how close the fight was and how huge it was in general. Along with that, I agree. I'm taking Diaz McGregor 2 to win that round. All right. So now that's the first round that side. So I figure we'd go through this entire quadrant of the bracket and come to our winner of this bracket. So, since you already laid out everything for the fights, just who'd you have?
Okay. So
in the next round.
So next round between Lawler and McDonald 2 and Vanderlei Silva and Quentin Jackson 2, I went with Lawler and McDonald. Then I went with Fedor Krokop and Cruz and Dillashaw. I went Cruz and Dillashaw.
Okay.
Lawler and Condit and McGregor and Diaz 1. I went with McGregor and Diaz, the first one. Levin and Akiyama and Diaz McGregor 2. I went with Diaz and McGregor 2. So you want to go?
Okay. No, so I'll say mine now. All right. So I had Mullen. All right. So between Mullen McDonald 2 and Vanderlei and Rampage 2, I had Lawler McDonald. I had Miller Lozon against Cruz Dillashaw. I've got Cruz Dillashaw. Between Lawler Condit and all right, Henderson Cerrone 1. I took Lawler Condit. And then between Levin Akiyama and Diaz McGregor 2, I got Diaz McGregor 2.
Okay. So then with Lawler and McDonald 2 and Cruz and Dillashaw, I went with Cruz and Dillashaw. And then McGregor and Diaz 1 and McGregor and Diaz 2, I went with McGregor and Diaz 1. Reason why, if it wasn't for that fight, obviously the second one would have not happened. The first one basically opened the doors for the next chapter of both of these guys' careers. If Diaz didn't beat McGregor, I don't think he would have even had the fight with Masvidal. This literally set everything up for both of these guys. That's why I went with this fight. And with Cruz and Dillashaw, I mean, you have Dominic Cruz just coming back like from a long layoff and just defying all the odds, showing he hasn't lost a step. So that's why I went with those two.
Okay. All right, that's a good case for both. I went so between Lawler McDonald 2 and Cruz Dillashaw, I went Lawler and McDonald. Very, I really could have gone either way with these for two different reasons, really. Like you said, yeah, Cruz coming back, doing what he did, how close the fight was, the technicality of it, was awesome. But just the whole show of Lawler and McDonald all together with, I guess, the visual part of it, with all the blood and the heart that they were showing, and that did it for me. I like them going on that one. And then between Lawler Condit and Diaz McGregor 2, I actually went Lawler Condit. So yeah, I've got a finals of two Robbie Lawler fights. So who'd you have in the
So in the final, yeah, it was tough between Cruz and Dillashaw and McGregor and Diaz. Really tough choice, but I just went with Cruz and Dillashaw. Like I said before, I mean, guy comes back with a long layoff. TJ Dillashaw at that time was one of the best strikers in that division, and there was just so much. There was a story to be told. TJ Dillashaw was basically, I think that was his last fight where he was partnered up with Team Alpha Male, and then all of a sudden, they just split apart. Dominic Cruz was able to beat TJ Dillashaw, and then the rivalry between Cruz and Team Alpha Male continued until he fought Cody Garbrandt and Uriah Faber. It really had, like, there was a future after this fight, so that's what made it so unique to me. So Cruz and Dillashaw is the winner in this column of the bracket for me.
Yeah, I'm not mad at that at all. That's definitely a worthy winner. So for me, between Lawler McDonald 2 and Lawler Condit, I went with Lawler McDonald 2. Mm-hmm. And this is another one could have gone either way, but I think, again, going back to what I said before, it's just the visual of it, the looks on their faces, like two guys, two gladiators going at it. That's what, like, the kind of feel I feel like it had. Maybe if that look had come out, like if visually it kind of looked that way during Lawler Condit, maybe I would have gone with that. I don't know. But yeah, Lawler McDonald too, I think one of the best fights ever. So I put that as the winner of that side, that quad. All right. Next couple of weeks we'll do one quadrant each week, eventually leading up to the week of what we're hoping for, especially hoping everything just goes versus Tony, wherever. So on, bringing everything together, picking our winners, along with predicting that pay-per-view. So, all right. So, everybody, thanks for watching. Let us know if you're looking at this. Again, it's MMAmania.com, their MMA Madness bracket. Let us know what you think. If you think we got anything wrong, your opinions, anything. And thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next week.